Hello, everyone. This is Chris from the Black Ocean. We're getting ready to go live here. We're just a few minutes beforehand. Everybody say hello to Stuart from Warcradle Studios. Give a little wave, Stuart. How's it
Hello,
going?
everybody.
Say that again.
We're all good. Can you hear me okay?
I can, I believe. There we go. If I turn my in-ears up, I can hear a lot better.
That helps.
There we go. So, Stuart, today we're here, but this is the inaugural Firestorm Armada Debriefing, and you're here to answer some questions about the brand new beta rules that came out just 5 days ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to field any questions about Firestorm, the Fire universe in general. But yeah, I imagine with the beta going live just a few days ago, that there might be one or two questions on that.
Yes, absolutely. Before we get to that, let's just have you introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about how we got to here, how you have made the new Firestorm. I would say streamlined the brand new Firestorm, and what your inspiration was for doing this in the first place.
Wow, that's quite a lot to talk about.
Well, how about a summary?
Okay, so let's. So Warcradle took over sort of ownership, custodianship of the Firestorm Armada IP, the property, about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We inherited a game that was sort of beloved, had some really exciting. I mean, I love Firestorm. I played Firestorm myself with my Ralphosa, but really we felt that taking the property on, looking at some of the sort of challenges that the property had, we sort of thought, is there something we can do with it? Do we just sort of turn the taps on and just keep the game running as it is, or is there something we can do to kind of update it, refresh it a bit, and give it a hopefully an appeal to a wider audience, so that it goes from being it's a bit of a niche game, and hopefully tabletop wargaming is a niche hobby anyway. But when you're a niche within a niche within a niche, it starts getting quite hard to find too many opponents out there at your local game stores and in your local clubs. So we wanted to create a game which had a slightly broader appeal, but also could take advantage of kind of more modern miniature design techniques, and a fresh pair of eyes and talents and things, because Firestorm obviously had been developed by Spartan, and they've done a fantastic job creating out of nothing and getting it to a particular point. Warcradle, we have our own designers, we have our own artists, we have our own kind of spin on things. So really it's a case of honouring and paying tribute to what's come before, taking what we think are some of the most iconic and exciting elements of that classic game, but then updating it, refreshing it, and creating something new. As a summary.
Yeah, that is a very quick summary. That's good. Then I got one more question before we start fielding questions from everybody else. What's the most important thing that you would want a new person to the game to get out of this? Where should they start?
Okay, well, fundamentally, the game's in beta test at the moment, and as exciting as the audience is finding beta tests, they're not really designed for new. They're not really designed for people coming in fresh to something. They are designed for the existing community. There's something we do for the existing fans of Firestorm, and also those existing fans of Warcradle that are excited about the idea of getting into a game from the start. So that's really what the beta is for. The beta is there to kind of kick the tires, sometimes replace the wheels and the bonnet and maybe the boot and the engine. But it is fundamentally, you have to put quite a lot into a beta to get anything out of it. Somebody expecting to just download the rule book and play the full game, they're not going to be able to do that for quite a while. And even when we do have all of the rules in place, they will change every week. We're going to update the beta, and sometimes it'll be a significant change. And so people should expect to either make more use of digital versions of the rules, so in other words, having an iPad or a tablet of some kind, or else having a very kind printer and copious amounts of ink, because there's going to be a lot of print, because stuff will be changing rapidly.
Okay, well, I'm gonna do one quick user, not question, but a comment. I'll post it up for you. Give our little test there. Can you see it there, Stuart?
Impressive Transformers collection you've got there, Stuart. Indeed. Bonus points, and you can't just guess Bumblebee and Optimus Prime and stuff. Bonus points for people that can name anything within the view behind me. No guessing. You've actually got to be able to, with any kind of confidence, point out what it is.
All right. Make sure you put that in the chat. And by the way, everybody, post your questions in the chat. So we're streaming to 3 places. We're streaming to a YouTube. We're streaming to right on.
Okay. And that's Grimlock. You can't have him either. As for the rest, lay it on. Let's hear it.
Oh. I think that's a relatively easy guess.
Well, you're naming stuff, but where is he? Because I know where he is, and I'm pretty sure he's not on camera.
Oh, and somebody's saying that we're getting a little bit of an echo.
Oh.
So do you have like another microphone or your speakers on in your computer?
Well, I'm on return. Does that help? I've turned my speakers off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see if that helps. But anyway, we'll keep going forward. There's some people saying, let's see. I see.
Oh, you do.
There you go.
The first female Transformer. So they made a. Gotta love the 80s.
And then we got one more, and then we'll hit our questions.
Okay, yeah. There you go. We got some fans out there. Your credentials are safe.
Sorry about the echo, folks. We'll try to figure out where that's coming from. Let's live with it right now. And so I'm going to just ask you to run through just a basic attack and how to resolve damage. Just a quick overview of it. And especially with the change for some people that we don't use whole points anymore.
No.
Right. So I'd like you to just go through that.
Okay. So it depends really on the weapon. What we wanted to do, and what we want to do, is to create a slightly more open game set or rule set where actually the weapons themselves are functionally very, very different to each other. It's not like something like Dystopian Wars or even a historical like a White Neighbor game where largely everything is a physical projectile with some kind of propellant out the back, and be a rocket, a shell, or whatever it is. At a very, very fundamental level, they are persistent. Yeah. In Firestorm, you're projecting gravity waves, you do beam energy, there's all manner of things. And there's also large mecha slugs with propellant in the back of them, and there's hypervelocity slithers of metal being hurled at things at light speed and so on. So there's all sorts of different weapons, and they will behave very, very differently to each other in the game. So there isn't really a kind of a catch-all way of doing an attack. However, there are some rules they all have in common, which is essentially you roll your attack. Your attack is created from your attack dice pool. Your attack dice pool is created from the dice that's indicated on the weapon profile. Now, the weapon profile will give 2 values. It will give a large value and a bracketed value to the side. The bracketed value is only relevant if you are linking, if you're firing more than one weapon system of the same type into the same attack. So let's put that to one side for now, and we're not going to be doing that. So what you're doing is you have your attack dice pool. You now need to roll them, and you need to roll to reach a target number. The target number is going to be, actually, I've just realised there's You might have it. Why? Oh, I wonder. I wonder if this has a microphone on it. In which case that might be. Coming. Might not.
Well,
No,
you could always although I suggested that you use the headphones at first, maybe just unplug them for a second, see if everybody can hear you still.
Well, is there?
You could unplug the headphones real quick. Maybe that'll get rid of the.
How's that?
We'll
I mean,
wait.
I now can't hear you because I have the speakers on. But
Oh. Yeah, that's not going to work. Put your headphones back in.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's more of an echo. So yeah, put your headphones back in. Let's continue on.
We don't want to do that.
Technical difficulties, everybody. Where it's the inaugural one. So
it's fine. So you have your attack dice pool, and you're looking for a target number. Now the target number is very much dependent on how your weapon system is has its qualities. So, for example, if it is a kinetic weapons, you need to hit them. You actually need to, because you're launching something at high speed against another target, but the other target is moving at high speed as well. I mean, these ships are hurtling around at many thousands of kilometers an hour, hundreds of thousands of kilometers an hour, depending on how much speed they've got going on. So you have to hit it. And where you're looking at the moment isn't where the ship is now, because it's obviously moved on some. So there is a degree, even with your advanced targeting computers and everything else you've got going on, there is a margin of error in firing a kinetic weapon. So your target number for firing a kinetic weapon is the distance from the target that your ship is compared to theirs. Now I can't hear an echo now. So I don't. Oh no, I can. For a second.
We'll get that figured out at some point.
So that's when you're firing a kinetic weapon, you're rolling, and your target number is the distance between you and the target. For example, conversely, an energy-based weapon, something like a beam weapon, it fires virtually at light speed. I mean, it is almost at the speed of light, and certainly for anything measurable within the game, it is the speed of light. So at the distances you're talking about, the thing that takes the longest is for the operator to press the button to fire the beam weapon. The actual beam weapon leaving or emitting from your ship and striking the target is instantaneous. So because of that, you don't roll to hit, because your onboard computational systems and things, as long as you know where the ship is exactly at that moment, the beam instantly hits the target. What happens then, though, is ships are used to having beams of energy blasted at them. So ships in Firestorm are protected by energy shields. An energy shield has a rating, has a value, and that value is the target number. So kinetic weapons, it's the distance to the target that is your target number. Against with a beam weapon of some kind, your target number is the shield rating of the target that you're shooting at, and that's one of the differences between those two weapon types. Once the shots have gone through, the other differences are kinetic weapons. Kinetic weapons ignore shields, because it's like you've ever seen Dune or whatever, like the slow blade kind of thing. Energy shields are designed to protect against energy weapons, as it were, so beam weapons of some kind. They can't protect against physical objects passing through. So small starfighter squadrons and things will fly through the shields, as would projectile weapons will pass through the shields. And you can imagine actually the starfighter pilot as he passes through that moment that he passes through the shield, probably like the hairs on the back of his arms kind of tingle slightly. He gets that maybe a slightly acrid kind of taste in his mouth, maybe as he passes through the shield, just because it's a barrier to energy attacks, but it's not a barrier to the physical. So kinetic weapons pass through the shield, so the shield rating is irrelevant if it's a kinetic weapon. But what a kinetic weapon does have to worry about is that again, this isn't the first time that big blocks of metal and things are hurled at other starships. So starships tend to have what they call point defense, which is, well, it varies on faction. It could be lots of tiny tiny kind of defense lasers. It could be something very simple, like a guy in a harness with a big like ACAT gun, like a Matrix 3 type thing. If that's about the only thing exciting to come out of that film, or anything in between. Yeah, so it can be relatively, for the far future, relatively low tech, all the way through to some kind of weird alien inscrutable defense system. But fundamentally, they work on the same principle. They're point defense, and they are designed to destroy the incoming physical attacks. So against a kinetic weapon, your opponent gets to do what they call a point defense roll, where they basically will roll their point defense value in an attempt to negate some of those shots coming in. Whereas a beam weapon, which is purely energy, is going to pass straight through. You can't shoot energy out. Well, maybe there are some unrevealed alien races that can do that, but certainly for how we've revealed everything in Firestorm at the moment, you can't do that. So instead, the shot can't be affected by point defense, and it will then impact directly on the ship itself and be affected by the armor of the vessel. So different types of attack are resolved in different ways. Obviously, we're in beta, so some of these things are going to tweak over time. It's important to remember that we've engineered, we gave people a load of dice values for some of these weapons, just so that people could try the weapons out. This doesn't reflect how those weapons are actually going to be in the game. I mean, we didn't arbitrarily throw some random stuff together. They're on the lines of how things should be, but we did dial everything up to 11 specifically so that lots of ships blew into millions of pieces, so that people would at least get a sense, though, very, very quickly on the fundamental mechanics of the game. It's not a week one of the beta is not about the balance of ship stats or ship weapon systems or anything like that. It is just about familiarizing yourself with how the game works. However, whatever weapon system you've used to attack a ship, eventually you're going to get a number of successes. Now, the successes, for people that are familiar with the classic game of Firestorm or with something like Dystopian Wars, once you've worked out the result of your attack, you're left with a number of successes, of hits, of damage, or what have you. Now, in a kind of traditional wet navy type game, something like Dystopian Wars, those successes would probably be applied against the hull and be like you'd lose hull points. In the same way that if you were a physical creature, you might be wounded or something like that, if you're like a big dragon or something. In Firestorm, it's slightly different because these are starships. And starships, we are working on the idea in the game that we didn't want starships to behave like battleships in World War II. You know, it's not a case of just lumping big chunks of metal off each other until eventually one of them sinks, or annihilating everything down to the waterline. And maybe these are starships. They're not armored in the way that we would be armored, or that we would see that things are armored today. They're much, much more sophisticated. I mean, this is 1,000 years in the future, for humans, at least. So, with the way it was resolved in Firestorm, the damage, rather than the damage arbitrarily kind of coming off a hull point system or something, instead, each point of damage that ship sustains causes what's called system damage. System damage is a dice roll. Each point of system damage causes a dice roll, and that dice roll directly informs you as to what system has been affected. So you might have damaged the engines, you might have damaged the weapon systems, the targeting systems, the shields, you might have knackered that point defense system, all manner of things, the reactor. So it's one of these areas that you've affected, and that will make an immediate impact on how that ship then performs in the game. So you have attack, effect, and then there's a persistent effect on the ship, and which needs to be repaired. And you can attempt to repair your system damage at the end of each turn. That's fundamentally how an attack works. Destroying a ship is essentially causing enough system damage of the same type that it exceeds the value that the ship has. Each ship has a value, which we call its mass value. If the amount of system damage of the same type, so drive leak, for example. So if you smash the reactor and say it's a battleship and you've caused 3 lots of this reactor damage, and they don't repair it at the end, by the time they get to the end of the turn or the end of the round, and you've caused either in that round or in previous rounds it's accumulated 3 lots of reactor damage, then at the end of that round, once the last repair roll is made, and if it's unsuccessful, the battleship explodes, and or fundamentally it's wrecked. The reactor overloads and guts the internals of the ship or what have you, but the battleship is destroyed. And that's how you destroy ships. You cause enough system damage that they either don't or can't repair it because you've caused 5-6 amounts of system damage, and there's just so much damage that they just can't hold the ship together, and the ship flies apart. And that's fundamentally how you kill things in Firestorm Armada.
All right. Well, we detected what the echo is from, and it's from me. So I'll keep my mic muted while you're speaking. But we have some questions, so I'm going to post a couple of those up right now.
My big question is, the Ozzy Dauncel Lance Rack is a beam weapon but doesn't have an effective value. Does that mean those lances have unlimited range? Yes, beam weapons have unlimited range. A beam weapon within the confines of a play area. I mean, over reality, if you're firing a beam weapon from one side of the solar system to the other, it's going to take time to get across. So, and in that time, the enemy would have moved away or could have changed course. But within the relatively small space of the engagement, which is, maybe 10 to 100,000 kilometers, depending on the size of the game that you're playing, something like that. The beam weapons, energy weapons like that, a beam is instantaneous and has an infinite range within the confines of the table. So have at it, pull the trigger, away you go. You're going to hit something.
Okay, we got another one.
I can see nothing.
That's because I'm trying to find it still. Hold on a second.
Cool story. We can talk about Transformers some more while we wait. Oh no, here we go. Question: with the moving to the next hex system, are you taking influences from the BattleTech space setting Aerotech? If I explained that I have no idea what BattleTech Aerotech is, well, that might help. We picked hexes. Look, as a younger man in my salad days, I do recall playing hex-based games. I think I did play a game of BattleTech once, although I was much more of a mech warrior on the PC kind of guy. But I do recall hex games. To be honest, I really didn't like them. I don't like hex games because that looks like a gnat on my head. I didn't like hex games because they felt very old-fashioned, and hex games had hex mats. In my experience, there was very few games that didn't have like a hex map that you played around. That was rubbish. Certainly, when we were looking at doing hexagonal bases in Firestorm Armada, the idea of a hex map was not high on our list of things. We want people to play on cool-looking space mats and things, and get out the airbrushes and do wicked nebulas and whatever else they want to do. Get your mum's black bed sheets from special romantic nights, silky black bed sheets. That might be a very specific memory I have, but anyway, just to play your game on. However, the idea of having 6 faces on a base was quite interesting. There's nothing wrong with 4. But it's not saying that 6 is better than 4. It's just about giving more options in terms of fire arcs, in terms of how things connect up in terms of formations. I think players will have seen now that formations are quite an important thing in Firestorm. Having the hexagonal base makes for more interesting formations that you can put together. It allows us to do things like how the turning templates work. That interacts better with a hexagonal base than a square base. There's lots of reasons, and hopefully over time, once the kind of initial shock of it has more than 4 sides has subsided, we hope that you'll find that this six-sided type of thing is actually is quite enjoyable and gives you more options in the game. Certainly for fire arcs, it lets us have more fun with the fire arc in terms of if we want something relatively narrow, we can go to one of the faces. But you'll have seen, so if you were firing port though, you're actually firing the beam and the quarter, so you have a slightly wider arc of fire and so forth. So there's some fun things you can do with the fire arcs, and over time, and as more rules, more interactions and things come out, we hope to be able to kind of play around with that as well. We did think about all sorts of different things in terms of the three-dimensionality of space, but certainly the fire arcs was something that we thought just gave us a more, if we're going to mostly be in a two-dimensional area, having different types of fire arcs and fields in general, we thought that was quite interesting to play with.
All right, here's another one. I don't have who it is because if you're on the group, you have to do those instructions that I posted off to see which particular user you are. If not, this is fine too. So here is our next.
What is the vision for how Firestorm Armada will differ from Dystopian Wars? Is one expected to be simpler and the other more complex? Is one aimed at bigger battles? No, they're both games that involve ships, and they're both made by Warcradle Studios. That's probably as much as they have in common. They are, so Dystopian Wars is going to lean, and when the game is released, you'll see very much so, it's leading quite heavily into the idea of the wet navy, things below you, things above you. That in some ways, Dystopian Wars pays more attention to the three-dimensional nature of warfare, only because in Dystopian Wars, submarines are literally underneath you, and the aircraft, sky fortresses and things are above you. And because your surface vessels are kept on a particular plane, that very much informs how the rule system needs to interact with the different layers. In Firestorm, it's assumed that everything is on different levels to each other. So actually, because of that, I mean, it's not Star Trek where there's some kind of unwritten rule where everything has to kind of orientate itself the same way. There's an assumption that everything's at different levels, pointing in different angles, and so on. So you can you can kind of fudge that bit entirely and work on the principle that weapon systems and targeting and positioning of ships kind of takes that into account a little bit, because it would be weird for two ships to drop out of faster than light travel and be on the same orientation, pointing in the same direction towards each other, kind of thing. That would be, unless they were rendezvousing, a chance encounter would be weird. So yes, in terms of the complexity of the game, so Dystopian Wars is more complicated in terms of, or it's more detailed, more granular in terms of positioning. It's a more positional game in that regard. The motion of ships in water is something that is, they have like a drift value and so on. The rules are more kind of focused in that area. But when it comes to weaponry and things, as I kind of mentioned much earlier, so thanks for the foreshadowing, once you kind of peel away some of the more kind of the cosmetic or some technological differences, fundamentally they're all about exploding objects being hurled at each other with propellant coming out the back. In Dystopian Wars, the vast majority of the attacks are, there's a couple of weird enlightened things, and I think that the Prussians are going around with their arc weapons and things, but that aside, weird electrical attacks aside, most things are similar to each other. So you'll see that there's a kind of more standardizing way that the weapons work in Dystopian War. So a heavy gun battery is a heavy gun battery, it doesn't matter where it is or who's using it. There's a kind of a consistency to how those weapons work. So they're both complicated and streamlined, just in different areas. I mean, hopefully you'll find that both games are streamlined and intuitive in all the areas, but in terms of the bit that you really need to kind of get your head around and master, in Dystopian Wars, it's very much about where your ships are and how you're positioning and so on. That's a really key part of the game. And in Firestorm, it's about your weapon systems and what ones you're bringing to bear and how you're applying different types of attack. Because I think players are going to discover as they explore through the beta, going all kinetic isn't the way forward. Going all beam isn't the way forward, and even just a combination of the two isn't the way forward. If you want to really start scything through your opponents, you want to use a combination of different weapon types, and then you also want to use things like your starfighters closing in and your boarding actions and other things to just do that last bit of system damage, choosing what that system damage is and kind of doing the coup de grace and finishing them off. So Firestorm is the attack, the battle, the fighting combat side is more granular and has more complexity to it. The movement and positioning is less so. I mean, there is still some sophistication to it, but it's more cool, zippy spaceship type stuff rather than going to move this tiny little base around type of thing. Dystopian Wars is very much about the position of your ships and where your assets are in terms of where they're above or below the waterline and so forth. But once you're into the heat of the battle and then the cannons are roaring and the rockets are going off and things, then it's just hold on to your ship's wheel and hope that you'll see the dawn kind of thing. So they're both naval games, but as I say, I think the flavour of them is very different, more so than just being in space or wet.
All right, that was a pretty thorough answer there. We got another one. Speaking of thorough, we got one from Alex BP. I know that's a huge one.
Petroleum or PayPal, either which. Yeah, okay. So, Alex BP, does this mean that in the fullness of time, one of my favourite phrases, the fullness of time, the balance is going to be more of a seesaw experience of larger ships trading fire, blowing up smaller ones, while bigger ones tend to last longer and cripple? That's having more cripple damage ships than outright blown up all the time, as opposed to a more 40k system where heavy firepower can result in massive numbers of enemy ships taken out quickly. That goes down to.
I'm going to add to that too. That also. Actually, I'll just let you finish. Sorry.
You have me going there, Chris. Okay. That will go down to the type of player you are. So the way Firestorm does work and will work even more so as it matures and develops as a rule set. You can, yes, battleships or the larger ships are going to stay around longer than the little stuff. The little stuff's annoying though, because if they group up into formations, they are like a swarm, and yeah, you can annihilate loads of the smaller ships, but there's a lot of them, and they can turn better than you can, and they can bring the fire arcs in, and they can snake back round, and so on. So different sizes of ships do behave slightly differently to each other. That said, yes, some larger ships can hang around if you are attacking somebody and you aren't using some of that finesse that I was talking about, and you're just basically hammering everybody with everything you've got. You're going to have a load of burning enemy ships kind of listing, but frustratingly, some of them are going to be hanging on in there as your canny opponent is sending his damage control teams to kind of manage systems. And you could have a battleship with 2 lots of system damage in every system. And there are 6 systems to have damage on. So that's quite a lot of system damage that they could be. If your opponent is smart, she or he is going to be managing and trying to just kind of chip in that those repairs as much as possible. If you're a good commander of your armada, and you're not going to allow that to happen, because yes, there are effects on those ships by having system damage, but you've not put them out of commission, and that battleship is still going to be hammering you with all manner of things. Okay, so you need to kill it. In order to kill it, your best bet is either to use specific weapons, because some of the weapons have qualities that cause particular types of system damage, like shock, overloads of shields and sensors and so on. You know, you're going to want to either use those types of weapon systems to just really hammer in and get that additional system damage in that one area to just put it out of its misery, or you're going to close for the kill. You're going to use your SRS, so your starfighter squadrons. They'll go in there with their missiles or torpedoes or what have you and finish her off for you, or you're going to use a boarding action and send your boarding teams on board and rip the heart out of the enemy ship. So it is about softening them up and setting them on fire, you know, blasting them. Yep, you can do that, but unless you are backing up with a bit of a strategy on how you're just going to start killing off these bigger ships, they're going to hang around for quite a while. So yeah, there's it's going to come down to the tactics that you employ and the tactics that your opponent uses to kind of mitigate and defend against some of that damage. It's almost like there's a war game there.
All right, so we got another one from, we got one from Mike Seeley.
Ah, good old Mike. Now, Mike has been a brilliant champion for Firestorm. And what I really like about Mike, and I'm just going to make him blush, is that Mike has never been, Mike's a really, he's a good guy. I've met him several times at conventions, and he's always been very welcoming, very warm, and very open to different ideas, even though sometimes I bounced ideas off him, and I can see the whites all the way around in his eyes. He's kind of, oh, that's I don't know how I feel about that, but he's always been really decent about it. And he's a good, I think, in any game that he's involved in, any community involved in, he's a good tabletop gaming champion. Mike has been a good supporter of the Firestorm community, and actually of Warcradle's work with the beta. Mike's been very, very good. So publicly, thank you, Mike. You're a champ. So our fixed 4 or any other direction going to make a comeback. Right. So that direct, super narrow line down the ship. No.
Well,
sorry,
that's a simple.
I can go into more detail if you like. No, because it goes into the idea that it's so there are fixed. The idea of fixed channel weapons. Which again is something that Dystopian Wars had as well, where it being very, very, very super thin line type stuff. No, the idea is that there's enough wiggle room in how a ship moves. You'll get, which is one of the benefits. So because you have the 6 fire arcs, the direct 4 fire arc, which is the front one, is actually still a lot narrower than you might see on some other ships. In some other games, but it is still it's still a little bit wider than the bullseye shot that you might get in something like X-Wing 2nd edition.
All right, we're getting a lot of comments from everyone. I'm trying to get to all of them, so please bear in mind if I miss one, I'll follow up after the show with Stuart and post the answers. Okay. Here's another one from Alex.
Size 12 on my feet, by the way. UK size 12. You know what they say about a man with size 12 feet? Massive socks. I didn't know what your questions were, so. Okay. How will 6 sides work on larger models that might have 2 bases or an elongated base? Right. If you look in the beta rules, and I think my glamorous assistant Chris might be rattling through it as we speak. When it talks about bases, it does talk about what you do if there is a model that has multiple bases. Fundamentally, that's in there. Look, we aren't at the stage yet of creating the miniatures for Firestorm. We've done all the concept work and we're working through them. So we hope that, barring a few extreme cases, we hope that all Firestorm models will go on one base. Not all Firestorm models on one base, but that each model will have one base. The models are going to be plastic, so that's going to help an awful lot. That said, we're aware that there's a lot of classic models that people are going to want to use, or other stuff that they're going to want to use in their games. And so some of those are going to use, there you go. Thank you, Chris. those are going to want to use, or they're going to have to use multiple bases. So in that, in the beta already, we've said that any model that is large enough to have more than one flight stand should use its front flight stand when determining direction, movement, and firing arcs. If a model ever has more than one flight stand in the front, or at the front, then the left-hand flight stand is used for measurements. And that's it. So imagine the ship is just on that front left flight stand, but physically I accept that the model is probably going to be on multiple flight stands, and that's in there particularly just to kind of help fans of the classic game that have classic models and they want to use those in the new game. But we hope that the new models won't use multiple bases. Yeah.
Here's another one about the bases.
Too. All about the base.
Question about it.
All about the base. How are the model placed on hex stands? 2 sides in front and back, or 2 corners? I don't understand the question.
I think he's trying to determine which direction, because you can put the pointy end at the front of the ship,
there's a picture,
or the flat end at the front.
There's a picture in the book. That actually, Chris, if you jump back to that, there you go. That's the ship. That's the way it's orientated. I assume that your ships will be bigger than the tiny ship on that base, but yes.
Okay, here's a question about SRS.
Will SRS be treated differently in the future? And what if I want bombs instead of fighters and so forth? Well, your SRS tokens are bombers and fighters. Depending on where you... So if you put them against... If you place them in base contact with an enemy ship, they're assumed to be bombers and you're making an attack run. If you put them in base contact with your own ship, they're assumed to not be bombers, as they are less useful in base contact with your own stuff. And they're assumed to be fighters, doing a cap of some kind, or else also kind of repair craft, support craft, that kind of thing. In and amongst the bombers that you send out, though, in base contact, you may well have some fighters mixed in amongst them, and those SRS tokens reflect that as well. So your SRS tokens already are fighters and bombers, depending on how you use them, depending on where you place them.
All right, and I'm just going to do the follow-up question that was just below it, that from Jamie Fox. It's pretty much the same. Will
there eventually be different types of SRS? No. Will there be more involved? Currently, if your ship has 2 defending SRS, there is no need to put your 2 SRS to attack. There's no way you can survive to attack the ship. Yes, we are going to look at, I'm aware that currently how the rules are written, deploying tokens or deploying your SRS tokens is a there's a kind of a dominance thing going on. So we're looking at that for the next update. And there's the rules talk about having 4 dice for an SRS attack. That's not correct. It's actually 2 dice per SRS token. That might make it a little bit different. Yeah, no, the fundamental SRS tokens are tokens. They're not models. They're not. They are representative of something rather than hyper detailed. I look at earlier editions of something like Dystopian Wars, and they're like worrying about fuel and stuff. Yeah, it's not going to do that. It's not. They're not things that you activate individually. They're not things that you fly around the board on their own. The scale of things, the actual size of them, they are smaller than a pinhead. They are utterly specks. I mean, a ship in Firestorm Armada is potentially a couple of kilometers long. I imagine that the actual true size on the map of things is probably at the base of the flight stand is actually that what you're looking at is kind of like a blown up holographic version of the ship, just so that you can tell them apart. For me, I don't actually think that the scale between cruisers and frigates and the battleships are actually the sizes between those models, or even that the models compared to other factions models are in scale with each other. I think it's all representative. You don't have to, and there's nothing in the rules that's telling you that they are that those are all not in scale with each other or in scale with each other. Notionally, I'm not so hung up about something like that, because really stuff is as big as you want it to be. It's kind of cool spaceship stuff, and ships don't interact with each other in terms of their true size in any meaningful way beyond the base. So it actually doesn't matter how big the ships are and things. But certainly SRS tokens, they are tokens, because regardless on how big you're making your ships, starfighters are minuscule. They're like gnats. They're just gnats with a very, very nasty bite.
All right, we got another question, and this one I'm going to make a little introduction. This is Philip Johnson, who we all call the Podfather. He was the head of 40K Radio. He also did some stuff with me on the Black Ocean before. I just want to say a quick shout out to Philip. How are you doing, man? Miss you, brother. And here's his question.
Will you have, that's a mighty fine picture of Philip there as well, looks very smart. Will you have Firestorm Armada, a living rulebook with updates? So will they be yearly or every 6 months? A very good question. So, at some point in the future, I would imagine that all digital rulebook that constantly, like a living rulebook, constantly updates, is the way that everything will be. I'm not a print is dead kind of guy, but I do think that is the way. But I think that most gamers at the moment, most people in our hobby, like to have physical things, and nothing annoys somebody more than spending money on a book or spending money to get something printed off, and then every 6 months or whatever, they then have to print it off all again because the whole thing's bloody changed. So one of the drawbacks of a beta is that it is, if you're going to ride with this thing the whole way through, it can be quite hard work keeping up with everything. We accept that that's part of being in a beta. If you want to kind of be in on the ground floor of helping shape a game, now unfortunately that's the downside is there's a lot of admin to go with it for you.
Hey, Stuart, before you continue on, we had a discussion just before this, before everybody was here, that the numbers in the beta are not fixed, right? That's something that you might want to talk about.
Oh, well, the weapon rules. I'm sure somebody's going to come and say that set in stone weapon system is we've got a balance wrong on it. So I'm waiting for a question about that to come up, and then I will address that point. Yeah. So what Philip was saying about the living rules. So what we will be doing is the rules, the rule book itself, as close as possible. Once that's released, we will stick with that rule set because we think that's going to be pretty solid. Until eventually we might do an updated printing or something of the rule book down the line. Wild's Exodus, an unrelated game, but it was one of our early tabletop war games. That went through a series of tweaks. We learned from that, and what we're doing is we're moving some of the material that would update more regularly. We're moving that out of the core rules. So actually the rules can stay consistent for, hopefully, for the life of the game, or certainly for a couple of years of the game. And the material that might update more regularly, so things like ship statistics, profiles, and so on, we're keeping them separate, and we'll keep them in a downloadable rule set. So the fleet list will be a downloadable document, and that will be something that will update more regularly. Maybe every 6 months to a year. It honestly depends on what it is that needs fixing. If it's a typographic thing, then we'll just fix that. If it's something more substantial about rebalancing a faction or something like that, then that'll probably be every year or so. Certainly, we would review the game. The game will be alive, so it will be reviewed frequently, particularly with things like FAQs and the updates to the fleet list.
Okay, I'm going to kind of combine the next two questions together. We got one from David here.
With most weapons having infinite range, very little line of sight, blocking terrain and space, and relative ease of turning a unit, how will Firestorm make good maneuvering important?
And then I'm going to add one more question to that.
Any comments on terrain? What sorts can we expect to dust up our collections? Okay, so two things. Terrain, because of the positional nature, is less important in Firestorm. It's not important, but it's less important. Really, positioning of your ships is about getting fire arcs into play. It's not about It's not so much about closing the distance with beam weapons, but with kinetic weapons, it's absolutely about closing the distance. And with some other weapon types, the Cerelians have some scatter attacks. The Aquans have, the Aquans are going to want to get up close, or conversely, you will not want to be close to the Aquans if you decide that you're going to start punching holes in them, because if they return the favor, they are going to melt your face off. So different ships, the distances is important, and the fire arcs are really important in the game. So those are the two things in Firestorm that are important. But as I mentioned earlier, the relative three-dimensionality of the space is less important in the way that Firestorm takes that into account to a degree. So because of that, physical objects like other ships and even asteroids and things like that, they don't really block line of sight in the way that they might do in a kind of a more pulpy cinematic type X-Wing thing, unless your ship is deliberately coming in and using. So this is the difference. Terrain doesn't block line of sight at all. There is no terrain in the game that blocks line of sight, even planets, because you're not going to have a planet on the table between the two of you. That would be colossal. Okay, you might have a planet to the edge, but again, you're still going to be able to see them over the planet. So things don't block line of sight normally. However, they do block line of sight, or you get a thing called obscured, if you choose to deliberately bring your ship close to the object and then try and deliberately shield your ship using that object. So there are rules, or there will be rules under the terrain that enable you to do that. So you can, as a maneuver, and there'll be more of those coming, you can deliberately choose to kind of shield or screen your ship from the enemy, and that gives you some benefits depending on where they are. It gives you both either the obscured rule, which actually is already mentioned in the glossary of terms, but actually isn't referenced anywhere in the book yet. So there's a little sneak peek. Or it can entirely block your line of sight. Depends on several factors that we'll get into when we talk about terrain. But terrain in and of itself, other than being pretty on the table, normally isn't a factor on things. One thing that is a factor is what we call environments. Environments are different to terrain. So terrain will be asteroids, debris, other bits and pieces like that. Your environment could be that you're fighting on the outskirts of a nebula, or that you're fighting close to a star or a gravity well, or some other phenomenon that is actually affecting the entire play area, and that will have some significant impacts to every ship. Every model in the game is going to be affected by the environment. So it's different again to something like Dystopian Wars, where islands and clouds and other bits and pieces make a difference. And again, it just reflects that it's a different kind of game.
So environment will be coming out at some point during the beta test?
Oh yeah, everything is coming out in the beta. We're going to beta test everything. So environments will be there, terrain will be there, loads of different ships, loads of different factions, lots of everything is going to be there. And some of the things that are currently in the beta will go away and will be replaced by something else as the beta develops.
Okay, I'm going to combine a couple questions one more time. So we'll start with Alex BP again.
So the new game models will be smaller, no dreadnought size length ships. Now I know that Andy Rucker from Man Battle Stations gets all twitchy when we talk about dreadnoughts being the name of things that are bigger than battleships, but I'm very comfortable with the name. Yeah, so we absolutely are going to have dreadnoughts. In fact, the background material, I know for some people it's just about the game and they're not really so interested in the background, but if you haven't read some of the background material for the Firestorm universe, I really do recommend it. You can find it right here on the Black Ocean. There should be a set of on this side, a set of labels that you can click. You can click your faction, and it will take you to a whole bunch of stuff, which will really go into a load of detail. On some of those factions, they do talk about dreadnoughts. They do talk about larger ships, and on the Aquan already, they have the ancients, which are the really big stuff. Actually, yeah, Chris, could you click Aquan Sebritan, please? And then if you scroll down to keep going past the past that, keep going, keep going. There, right. So if you click the, so you see on the of the ships themselves. So that one there, that is a dreadnought-sized vessel. That is a big boy. That will have a mass of 4. There's a very excited baby in the bottom right-hand corner. Whereas so that's a Vonar Ancient. Whereas if you click the right arrow on the picture, whereas that is your battleship size thing. That's a Vonar Elder. So it's still big and devastating and horrible and spits star material at you, but is not as nightmare-inducing as trying to pick a fight with an ancient. So yes, there are big ships in Firestorm, and I'm not saying that that is the biggest.
Just as a personal aside, I absolutely love the lore around the Aquans now. That Ceruleans used to be my favorite. I might be playing an Aquan fleet.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Aquan. I know that they are different to how they're not like seafood given an empire as they were previously, but I do think that they make for an interesting faction. What we wanted 8 factions. Each one was very different to the other, and it wasn't enough to have them as well. These guys are basically kind of the lizard ones with hot ships, and these guys are the watery ones and the water-filled ships. And so we wanted them to be more fundamentally different to each other. I'll be honest, we wanted them to be more alien to each other. So we really kind of leaned into certain tropes and certain ideas. And absolutely, I mean, some people go, "Oh, this is a little bit like this. Reminds me of Starship Troopers. This reminds me of Geiger, or this reminds me of Star Trek, or whatever." Cool, yeah, all of those things are true because we love all science fiction, and we want to reflect as much of that as possible because it's such a Dystopian Wars is fantastic because it lets us play with kind of alternate universe politics and kind of leaning on the kind of the in-joke archetypes and things and the whole steampunk, diesel punk aesthetics. There's loads to really enjoy about Dystopian Wars. And actually there's a, without kind of blowing our own trumpet, but there's almost like a cleverness of kind of weaving stuff together. Something that Spartan really enjoyed doing before, and it's something that we enjoy doing with Dystopian Wars too, the dystopian age. With Firestorm, I mean, people like Roberto Cirillo, our art director, I mean, he's not crying, but it's like tears of joy kind of thing, because it's knock yourself out, Roberto, go crazy. What do you want these guys to look like, kind of thing? So that's why when we even came around to designing the actual races themselves, the actual species, we tried very hard to avoid they're all humanoid with a different forehead kind of thing. We tried to make them as alien as possible. And yeah, sure, some of them are reminiscent of other kind of cool alien things in the past, but that's, you know, we'll either take that compliment or we'll pay that homage. Yeah, we love it, and we think that kind of blending some of these things together, we're making a really exciting and interesting universe to play in. And yeah, the Aquan are a key part in that. We wanted them to be more than they were before. Really different, really interesting, and there's quite a lot about the Aquan that is utterly unique and has not been seen in any other faction in the game, and won't be either. There's I agree with you, Chris. I think the Aquan are super cool.
All right, we got another one here. Let me see. About old models.
Well, so when the game is released, we will release packs of bases. So the bases are going to be made in plastic, and you will be able to, the current prototypes that we're playing with at the moment have integrated in, have a speed tracker built into it as well. So you can track your speed, so there's not bits of paper everywhere and things. They also have a notch in them which enables you to lock the moving turning template in, because the turning template has little teeth on it as well. So there's some cool stuff going on. But yes, we're aware that people with classic models don't have any of that stuff, so they can buy those bases. We're not looking to make fortunes out selling you loads of bases. It's not like 50 quid a base or anything stupid. We want you to have the bases in order to play your game. We can't give them to you for free, but we're not going to charge you fortunes for them. Yeah. I smile when people, and it's not the community now, but I've seen in other games for other things, when something comes out and there is a portion of the community that's like, oh well, this is just a plan to. We had it with Dystopian Wars. Dystopian Wars uses pictographic dice for one of the mechanics, and it was like, oh well, this is obviously they're only doing that to sell us loads of dice, and it's like, pretty sure that the financial success of the game isn't based on selling you dice with pictures on it. That's not the reason why we're doing it. And the same with Firestorm. It's not about gouging people for these bases. We want to make these bases as easy for people to use as possible. The bases themselves are compatible with. We have like a little ball socket joint that's on the top of the flight stands that we have. They're the flight stands that we currently already make, but they're going to be compatible with the flights with the bases for Firestorm as well. They should socket in. You could also use, I think Drop Zone have got like a little widget system, or you could use. There's all sorts of different companies have little widgets. I am sure, with the community being as creative as they are, there'll probably be half a dozen different solutions on how to connect the bases in. But we are designing the bases, and we are working, because we use classic models in the studio as well for playtesting. So we are designing it that it should slot in. But obviously, some that use multiple bases, multiple square acrylic flight stands and things, you're probably going to have to stick in a couple of bases. And again, the rules have already been designed to take that into account. Or maybe try and find its center of balance and see if you can get away with the with balancing it on the flight stand. It's again, that's going to be down to the community to experiment with.
That's a good follow-up for this one here. Let me see if I can find it. There, this one.
Do you have any problems with my designing printing hex bases for the community? Well, it's a difficult one. In terms of to help people, no, of course not. If it's in terms of, so there is nothing intrinsically IP related about a hexagonal base with lines on it with a flight stand. I mean, Aeronautica Imperialis uses hexagonal bases, Battletech uses hexagonal bases, and so on. If you were to start to use like the Firestorm logo and Firestorm terminology and stuff on it, I would be less keen on that, because fundamentally because there's the danger that one or two things can happen. One is somebody's going to take your hard work and then maybe try and monetize that or be outrageous with it, and we wouldn't want that. And the other one is that somebody could find that because it's got potentially our logo and other bits on it, they might think that it's an official product, which again, it wouldn't be. But in terms of making something to help the community, no, absolutely not. If you want to make your bases and stuff, cool. We have no issue with that whatsoever. You can cut them out of acrylic, you could design them and 3D print them, whatever you guys want to do. If it helps you with your games, yeah, knock yourself out. I would say that we're in beta, so the sizes of things are potentially going to vary, and what we're not going to do is we won't change it because loads of people have already 3D printed their bases. That's obviously not going to be a consideration for us, but with those caveats aside, fill your boots.
All right, now we got one about repairs, and I'm going to add to this one. Will there be a repair ship at any point? Do you have any visions of those kind of things?
Okay, so I'll talk about your repair ship first of all. The idea of an actual repairing ship, yeah, I mean, it would be pretty niche because, yeah, I mean, it's not like, yeah, I mean, yes, I could see a reason to do a repair ship for some factions. The two human factions are likely to have a repair ship or a salvage ship. The Bakash already have a kind of a repair ship because their clan ship, if you look at Roberto's concept art, has all sorts of cranes and other things inside it. So it is as much for repairing and maintaining their fleet as it is for taking them apart. The Ryushi, I would see fleets that are either humans, because that's how we work on stuff, or are that kind of like a ragtag Galactica style fleet where all their resources, everything they have, is kind of self-contained within their fleet itself. They don't have masses of home worlds and other bits and pieces or orbital yards and things to fall back on. Yeah, I could see them having repair yards, repair ships, and things. In terms of how repairs are done, so a unit does its repairs. You do resolve the model by model. The only way that you would change that is if your models are in formation, in which case models in a formation pool their dice. So you would get so you have a frigate and then 2 other frigates in base contact. Well, they're rolling 3 dice to repair, whereas a frigate on its own is rolling 1 dice. That would be and the great thing about being in formation is that you can apply those repair results to any ships in your within that formation, so they can share repairs or share repair teams and so forth. And don't forget, you're also adding bonuses, and this kind of comes back to your repair stuff. SRS tokens that are in base contact with you, it is assumed that some of those will be support craft, repair ships, work bees, whatever. There's a little Star Trek reference for you with a work bee. But yeah, so there's some kind of repair craft, and they will be able. They also assist in your repair dice pools.
All right, our next question, and I'd like to say we've been on for about an hour so far. We'll maybe go about another 15 minutes. Is that okay with you, Stuart?
Yeah, it's okay. I've got a giant fridge next to me for the Diet Coke, so it goes on as like.
Okay, perfect. So the next one is coming from David Boren. I hope I got your name right, David.
Will he be coming out with an official list building app and using that for maintaining the official stats and point costs? Yeah, I mean, we'd like to. I mean, I think if we did that in an app, we would always support it with a printed thing. The idea would not be to make people pay a subscription for an app service. The app would have lots of advantages, and we'd make sure it was a decent app. But recent history has shown that apps can be difficult for people to maintain well. I know GW's had some troubles recently, but they're not alone. I know the Privateer Press with their War Room, I mean, they went through all sorts of issues and so on. So there are, depending on what you want the app to do, there are certainly levels of complexity that we would add to it and that we would enable it to do various bits and pieces. But we'd only do an app if we could actually get it working right. And we would always make sure that that wasn't the only place that you could maintain stuff, that we would have. I mean, I'm old-fashioned. I like pen and paper when I'm working out an army list. Occasionally, I might put it not even in a spreadsheet. I put it into Word and make it pretty. But yeah, really, I'm old-fashioned when it comes to writing army lists. I'm also one of these people that just writes lists. But what could I have here? Not even for a game. I'll just kind of, what's in this list? What could I do? What would that look like? What would it look like if it just took battleships or something like that? So an app of some kind, regularly updated, would be definitely the gold standard. Would be something we'd want to do, but we'd always make sure that we had a physical way of doing that as well.
And don't forget that, the Black Ocean, before, we were instrumental in making Army List on the Army List Builder and those kind of apps too. So I'm sure that if we can come to an agreement, we'll be definitely helping Stuart from Warcradle on that too.
Subtly done, Chris. Thanks for that.
Okay, I got another one coming here from Jason Carter.
God, it's a fierce looking throne. Is there any concerns with kinetic weapons having hits equal system damage dice regardless of the size, mass of the target ship? I mean, concern might be a bit strong, but it's something we're looking at. One of the things that during the alpha, both energy weapons and kinetic weapons both resolved against armor. Currently in the beta, kinetic weapons don't resolve against armor. It's only point defense that stops them. We might increase the kinetic dice pool slightly and resolve them against armor. I think it just depends on how the beta goes. We're not set on any one way of doing it at the moment. I think it's just what's the most fun and intuitive way of doing it. So we might look at resolving kinetics against armor as well. At the moment, armor in the game is more of a refractive kind of coating on the hull rather than blocks of chopper armor or Kevlar or something like that. But yeah, we'll never say never. So we'll look at that as each week of the beta progresses. And in fact, we may even just try it differently and see what people think.
This next question kind of goes towards when you guys are finally producing models here. We've got the 2-player starter box or fleet boxes that will include a whole playable fleet.
I mean, we're away from that, but there would be a 2-player starter set for sure. I think in the industry that's something that people want. And then there would be fleet boxes or helix boxes. The helix, I would imagine, would contain a battleship or a large ship of some kind, some cruisers or some mass 2 ships and some mass 1 ships, and little stuff in a combination in plastic. And then you would be able to sort of build them separately and do different things with them. But I mean, we're a ways off being able to kind of confirm any of that stuff. We haven't. There's no serious sculpting work. It's all conceptual and design stuff at the moment for Firestorm. We're not at the stage of being at where Dystopian Wars is, which is where we have plastic sprues and all sorts of cool stuff coming out of manufacturing. Firestorm isn't there yet.
Just to be clear, you're planning on plastic models, correct?
Yes. No resins, plastic.
I agree. I have lots of resin models, and while I liked those, I still always preferred the plastic models. And it's probably easier on production too, right?
Yeah, it's more expensive, like a lot more expensive. I mean, anybody can you can have resin production in your garage if you wanted to. Good resin production is a lot harder. There's probably only half a dozen companies, I think, that make very good resin miniatures. And they're a present company. Plastics isn't great for everything. And sometimes a resin miniature can be better. It can have better quality than a plastic miniature because of the manufacturing needs of how a resin model is made and a plastic miniature is made. But I think for starships, for the kind of for the shape of a starship, plastic tooling offers some real advantages for the hobbyist, and that's certainly something we would want to do.
All right, we got another a question from Christopher James Smith, and he's trying to get a little bit of insider information.
Okay, so that is 2 different things. Stealth and cloaking are 2 different things. So stealth is something like the Dindrenzi have with their intelligence ministry, with the Works Raptor. So the Dindrenzi, they have their stealth ships, and to a much lesser degree, some of the Scions, the RSN, they have some stealth technology. The Directorate has some stealth technology as well. So some factions have some stealth capabilities, and that is more in line with being obscured, being harder to target, and so on. True cloaking is the Ralphosa have stealth as well. True cloaking is very, very rare in the game. The ability to be invisible, to not be seen. there is only one faction that is a significant player in that area, and that is the Vadrith. The Vadrith have cloaking technology, and what that means is that you cannot see where the Vadrith are. It's not a case of that the ships are there, but they're, I'm not really here. You can't target me, but my model's there. You, as a player against the Vadrith, you have no idea where the Vadrith are. All you know is that they're out there somewhere, and they are coming for you.
I left my mic unmuted for that part. Sorry about that, guys, with the echo.
So you had an ominous echo.
Yes, absolutely. They are coming for you. Okay, we got another one here from, another one here from David. How do you envision tracking ship speed, and how high do you think a tracking method needs to handle? I think he means how high it needs to be.
Yeah, it's a dial integrated into the 50-pound Warcradle hexagonal bases. And that's a joke, by the way, they're not going to be £50, £49.99. And how high does it need to go? Okay, so this is one of these things where people get very excited when they think about infinite things. They go, oh my God, yeah, that blows my mind. And it's the same with like infinite ranges on weapons, but the reality is how big's the table, because that's only the length of the, if you're playing 40k and you were shooting a 72-inch weapon or a 48-inch weapon on a 36 along a 36-inch table edge, then, or 48-inch table edge, then that's largely an infinite range, because unless you're shooting across the diagonals and things significantly, your weapon's going to hit anyway. Also, it's going to reach. In Firestorm, weapon ranges, being infinite isn't that much of a big deal, and the speed is infinite in the game. If you keep thrusting, you will make your unit travel faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. But the reality is you will fly off the edge of the table long before you get much higher than about. I mean, if you're doing 20 inches a turn, you're gonna be off the table in a couple of turns. If you're and you have to accelerate up to that speed as well. So we have found so far in the alpha testing and in the beta testing that we're doing at the moment that a dial doesn't need to go anywhere near higher than 20. It's quite rare that a ship is going faster than 20. And if they do, they are they're within their thrust of 5 or 4 or whatever. And usually if they're going 20 and then they use their thrust to go to 25, they're in real danger of zipping off the sides.
Okay, so we got another one from Philip, the Podfather. Want to read that one?
I would
Stuart?
love to read that one. Have you ever thought about adding a mini game to Firestorm, like a political system, something that makes space combat different from the other space combat games? My example is like Song of Fire and Ice, where they use characters in the side map. You could add models to show your commander as you try to outwit the other player. No, I've never thought of that. It's an interesting idea. One of the great things about creating a setting is that we can potentially create multiple games within that setting. So it doesn't necessarily have to be contiguous with the game of Firestorm Armada that you're playing. But that's not to say that something like that might not be interesting. I don't know. The only thing about politics is that within the Firestorm universe, some of those factions are deeply unpolitical because you're irrelevant with whatever you want. They're not really looking to negotiate anything. And other factions like the Vadrith would be deeply offended that you even think that you're on their level to try and talk to them in any kind of, like, you have anything that they want. And others like the Bakash would probably just try to stab and eat your ambassador. So I don't know. I think it depends on that. But I'll tell you what, Philip, if you want to drop me a PM or something, I'd love to know more. Well, I'll have a look at that for sure.
Yeah, there's are a few games that do use characters to kind of bolster some models too. That was an interesting question. We've got another one from one. I'm sorry, not another one. One from Mike Seeley here. He's asking, recognizing that it's dependent on volume of feedback. What is the goal for publishing updates to the beta rule?
Every week. We will update the beta every week. I will probably, it's not set in stone, but I will probably aim to update it every Wednesday. That gives us, I mean, being realistic, it gives us the Monday to kind of start to collate the material from the weekend. It gives us the Tuesday to actually start to update all the documents. Then it gives us the Wednesday to publish it. Dependent on bank holidays, other studio projects and other bits and pieces, that might shuffle, but certainly we would look to update the beta every week. And if we're not going to in any particular week, we would tell people in advance so that people aren't just clicking refresh every Wednesday waiting for an update that never comes.
All right, another one for David.
You expect the final rulebook will contain some sort of campaign system, or perhaps this might be an expansion product. Would it be the sort of thing you can earn upgrades to your fleet over time? David, you are absolutely on my page. That is exactly what we want to do. Whether it features in the rule book itself is unlikely, because I like to have, I can see that, and it'll be for free. We'd have that as a downloadable resource. And then maybe there'd be a produced product down the line. I don't know, but certainly a proper cool campaign system with loads of like experience and other things like that for the factions, and like interesting things to discover and so forth. Definitely something we want to do for sure.
We're almost at the end of the comments here. We got this one from, I guess it's Evo.
Yep.
Ivo. Yep. Will we see mixed squadrons, like frigate squadron led by a cruiser, or cruising squadron led by a heavy cruiser or battle cruiser?
There's no plans to do that. That is not, having a mixed squadron is not something that we're looking to do in Firestorm. If there was other than you could do it before, or it's kind of interesting, if there was some kind of cool game dynamic and it didn't make it too complicated, because I could see a lot of advantages in having a battle cruiser as your lead ship, and then having a load of little frigates around it, and throwing in a load of +1s and things. That could be quite nasty. So I'm open to suggestions on it or discussion on it. I think the rules for it would have to be fairly straightforward, and it would have to bring something significantly interesting to the game. If both of those things could be delivered, yeah, why not?
All right, so I'm going to take a personal indulgence here. Right there is, I believe, the Arushu Diaspora fleet carrier. It was before, I believe.
Yep.
So is this one of those ones that's going to be put out in plastics?
Yeah, everything.
Including the acrylic colored pieces on that, because that was very unique on that.
Yeah, it would just be either a clear acrylic piece or a plastic piece, a transparent plastic piece. That we don't know yet, because obviously we're a way away from the fabrication of it all. But yeah, certainly we will be looking to do all that in plastic. There's no point creating loads of stuff in resin if we can help it.
Okay, and also we didn't do this before, but we are looking for everybody to put the feedback on the beta rules at firestormarmada.com. Is that correct?
That is. We've had loads of feedback already, really good feedback. I'm not looking forward to tomorrow, where I start having to pick through it all and update the document. No, I'm joking. It'll be good. So you should expect to see the beta document updating on Wednesday as we click over to 0.002. And depending on the feedback and so forth, I think it's going to be really interesting early few weeks as things will start to shape up. And I think a lot of the feedback so far, I have looked through some of it, appears to be just trying to understand something or maybe get something clear. So we'll look to add some examples and add some additional explanations and things, so that how certain things interact is kind of clearer for people. There's been some really interesting suggestions as well, and some of those we'll certainly add into the rules. What you'll find is that so things like cyber warfare and stuff like that, we're not going to add that in. We're not going to switch that on just yet until the mechanics that we're currently dealing with are kind of more settled, and then we'll add cyber warfare and other bits and pieces, and yeah, and on and on and on.
And then there's also another comment that I wanted to speak of, and I know that we're not quite ready for this, but we've talked about this before. You're planning to support this game through conventions and various tournaments, correct? Once we can all do that again.
Yes, yeah. A healthy community scene is essential for the game, not just this game, but for any game. So yeah, we'll be working with our war hosts, which is our community volunteers, and we'll also be working with the wider community, game stores. Our trade team will be talking to game stores if they want to hold various events and activities. In any way that we can, we will be supporting the game to help people organise and play games with friends, either new ones or old ones.
Okay, and for those of you who are not on the Facebook group for Firestorm Armada, I've just put the address up there. I want to thank you very much, Stuart, for coming and answering all these questions. We made it through all of them, believe it or not. If you have any more questions, be sure to post them on the Facebook group, and we'll get to them and answer them and add them to the FAQ as quickly as we can. Also, you should know that Warcradle Studios, that address that we just added down below. And like I said, thank you, Stuart, very much for coming on and answering all these questions. I think we got a lot of information from you. I know that I, for one, will have to go through what we just talked about and actually get it settled in my mind. I do want you to stay on the feed after I turn it off, but we're going to end it in just a couple seconds here. One more time, this is where you're going to post your beta feedback for. And if you guys all would do a comment thanking Stuart on the page, I really appreciate that. And we've had a great time. We're going to do this again at some point, right, Stuart?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And,
okay.
I just wanted to say thank you for you to organise this. It's been, it's been good. If only to show off my collection.
That is one awesome collection too. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe out there. I don't know if you've heard about where I'm at. We got some smoke, so just try to stay safe and make sure that you be good to each other. And on one of my groups, one of the things we always say is be excellent to each other. So always do that. And I will see you in the Black Ocean. Have a good day. Bye.